Terry, can you hear me? I don't think Terry can hear.
You chase everybody away with all your good stuff or what?
Well, if I get two to show up, if it's me and another person, there's a class that's going to happen.
There you go.
It's interesting. I usually say 10:55, or I set the start time at 11:05. And that usually seems to fix any late arrivals. So we'll see what happens. Buffy's
Hey,
here.
Dave.
Hi, Terry.
Hi.
Hi, David.
Did you get,
How can I help?
did you get the alert that I needed a password
I'm
to get to that
listening.
video?
Go away. Okay. Don't say that word, SIRI. Buffy, can you hear us?
Mm-hmm.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good afternoon if you're Terry.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Owen, can you hear us?
Sure can, Dave. How are you today?
Good. Welcome.
Thanks.
Jake's out.
So is Chris. Chris is in a meeting.
Chris is out. Okay. And Alex is showing. Did you say Alex is here, Reese?
Yeah, I met with him yesterday and he didn't indicate to me that he wasn't going to be here.
Okay, we'll wait a couple minutes here. You guys watched the exciting All-Star game yesterday?
Did not.
Got some highlights. There's some good catches.
My son went. I actually picked him up from the game last night, he and his wife. And it looked kind of fun. I don't know. I had it on TV, but I didn't watch much.
Nice. Was it pretty crazy down there?
Not when we got him, because they left a little bit early. His wife is pregnant, so she likes to leave that kind of thing a little bit early. So it wasn't crowded when I got them, but I'm sure it was. They didn't want to park down there because the parking was like $150.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That was nice of you to go get them.
I'm a nice guy, Owen. If you saw me away from here, you wouldn't even know me.
I don't find that too hard to believe. I can see you with like a big green mohawk or something playing your guitar.
That's right. Yeah. Well, speaking of guitars, we got a real guitar player with us. Hi, Adam.
I'm retired, it's different.
You're retired? Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're going to start rolling here. Alex may pop in. Reese, if I see Alex pop in, I'll try to catch him.
Perfect.
All right, everybody, welcome to Sales School. This is week 5, I believe. And I brought up the All-Star game because I want to tell a little story about what this session is about. It's called Setting Expectations, and specifically it's using a verbal agenda to lay the groundwork for the sales call. Any good meeting starts with an agenda. It's fair to let everybody know what's going on, what to expect. And we'll get into the importance of expectations in a minute, but I want to take you to how many of you are familiar at least with baseball? You don't have to be a huge fan, but at the beginning of every game, at every single level of baseball, there's a meeting that takes place at home plate. And the people that need to be there are the home team coach or manager, the visiting team coach or manager, and the umpires. Any guesses as to who's in charge of that meeting? Anybody?
Head umpire?
You'd think so. The person in charge is the home field manager or coach. And the reason is because they're talking about ground rules. Now the umpire is they're gonna throw some stuff in there about the way they like to run the game. However, if you know anything about baseball, the rules of baseball are the same, except for the fact that it's played on different fields. And each field has its own nuances, its own rules. An example would be here in Seattle, we used to have a building called the Kingdome. And the Kingdome had a top on it, and the speakers were up in the rafters all the way up to the top. And from time to time, a ball would go so high that it would hit one of those speakers. Now the speakers were in foul territory, I believe. But if it hit that speaker and came back into the field of play as a fair ball, it was a fair ball, right? And so I imagine what would have been the case if that wasn't discussed by the home field manager before the game, right? The whole place would have just come unglued, right? And so just like any sort of, and baseball is the only sport I know of that has different rules for each playing field. That you could argue NASCAR, you could argue cricket and things like that, but you know, football, hockey, basketball, the rules are pretty much the same no matter where you play. But in baseball, it's a little bit different that way. So that's something that has to be discussed so that when it happens, everybody has an expectation of how you proceed. Sales calls are just like that, right? And the reason I love this class is it probably gave me the most help when I was a new sales guy. It probably is the biggest difference maker. I hear all the time from my clients that this is the thing that causes the most early and positive change in their selling. I hear more than anything else, this stuff right here is a difference maker. And let's talk real quickly about where we're at. So in the process, remember this sales process that we put up, where we are in time is right here, right? We have generated a lead to the point where we've gotten that person to agree to sit down and give us some time, right? That can be by telephone, it can be by in-person meeting, it can be by Zoom. But they're going to sit down, they're going to talk with us. And when we sit down with them, right here is where we want to set expectations. So let's talk about what we want to cover in this class. First of all, start out with the problems prospects have with salespeople. Define what a verbal agenda is. Talk a little bit about what the advantages are, then the elements of it. I'll give an example. I'll run you through what a verbal agenda sounds like, what it looks like. And then I'll introduce to you an exercise that I want you to take away so that you can create this thing for yourself. And I'll say again, once you've completed that, go ahead and send that to me and I'll take a look at it and see if anything is out of whack. This is really important for outbound salespeople for sure, but it really comes into play for an inbound salesperson because, you know, once that person calls in and you've got a very limited amount of time to take control of that sales call. And so this becomes extremely important. So let's start out with problems prospects have with salespeople. So there's this push and pull kind of headbanging thing between salespeople and prospects, right? Or can be. And the reason that the prospects have the problem is, first and foremost, salespeople who try to get the prospect to say yes, right? You try to push them into an agreement, try to sell them something, try to ram stuff down on them, right? That's going to be a problem for the prospect, even if they do say yes, oftentimes, right? Another thing are salespeople who talk too much about themselves, their company. They don't listen. They show up, and you've heard me say before, they're walking, talking billboards for their company, right? Just coming in and pounding them with the features and benefits. Salespeople who tell prospects what they should do. Probably because trust isn't built yet. Now, customers, oftentimes, if you have a good relationship with you and you're certain that they trust you, you can tell them what they should do or what you think that they should do. However, with prospects, especially on the first time you sit down with them, they're not ready for this. There's a saying, you can shouldn't on anybody all you want, but never should on them. Okay. Next, and finally, salespeople who don't know what their who don't let their prospects know what to expect, right? The prospect has no idea what's going to happen to them, and they're nervous and they're worried, right? Good example of that is going to the dentist. It used to be that going to the dentist, you'd walk in and you'd sit down and they'd take a look and they'd start working on you. Well, that scares the crap out of people because they don't know what's happening to them. Well, now what dentists do, if you notice, is you go in there, they do the exam, they tell you what they see, they tell you what they'd like to do, right? And then guess what? They send you home. And on your way out the door, you'll meet at that reception desk and you'll schedule an appointment. Oftentimes it's for the exact same time next week that you were there. Okay. If you happen to come back, that tells them that you want the work done, right? So they bring you in, they sit you down, they explain to you again what to expect, and then they do the work, but not before they've laid it all out for you, right? And as a result, people have a much better experience at the dentist and they tend to go more often. Sales is not unlike that. Letting people know what to expect. So what's the definition of this thing? The definition of a verbal agenda is an agreement made just after initial rapport and bonding, which sets the expectation for the sales call. So you're in there, you're talking about whether anybody saw the All-Star game, right? You're having that chit chat, right? The upfront pre-symbolic speech. And then at some point, you're going to want to move into that sales call and have that sales discussion, that business conversation, right? At that point is the place where you want to deliver a verbal agenda about the things that you want to cover in the meeting. Make sense? Okay, let's talk about the benefits of that verbal agenda. Right? So the first one, it sets expectations. We'll get the obvious one out of the way. Second, it puts the salesperson in control of the agenda. It allows the prospect to either agree or disagree with what's going to happen. Again, think of going to the dentist. They might tell you 5 things and you say, I only want to do the first 3 today. And they'll only do the first 3. Right? So keep in mind, a prospect can say no to any of this stuff. And it at the end of the day, it allows the salesperson to assert themselves if needed. And the reason you can assert yourself is because you covered the ground in the beginning and that prospect said it was okay to do that. For instance, there's a section here we cover about asking questions. Let's say you go through this verbal agenda up front, right? And they agree to that. And when you ask them a question, they go, hold on, I'm not comfortable with that. Well, you can refer to the verbal agenda, the expectations that you set, and feel comfortable asking questions about that, right? But if you don't cover this ground, it's really going to throw your sales call out of whack if somebody decides they don't want to do something that you wanted to do. Okay, so there's several points in a sales process where you as a salesperson might have to be assertive. And assertive and aggressive are two different things, right? We all hear that term aggressive salesperson, or we like or don't like an aggressive salesperson. Well, aggressive people are those that, well, let me start with assertive people. Assertive people are people who stand up for their own rights. Aggressive people are those people that tend to try to take other people's rights away. Right. So when we're talking about this aggressive salesperson, right, oftentimes that's put in a positive light. I think what people mean is assertive salespeople. Some of us spend a lifetime trying to learn how to be assertive. Well, in the sales role, you have to be, and you can learn to do that much more easily, provided you set that expectation. Questions or comments before we move on? Okay, good. What are the advantages? The advantages of a verbal agenda is, first and foremost, it's different than what most salespeople do. And when in a world where we're all trying to differentiate ourselves, I'm here to tell you the first and most effective way to differentiate yourself is in the way that you sell. Because when you do this, your prospect is going to notice it right off the bat as something that's different. And if anybody's had any experience with this, like Adam, you know what I'm talking about. And you don't have to be perfect to do it. You just need to try it, and you'll start to see the difference. Your customer, your prospect might even tell you that it's different. Okay, the next thing, the salesperson is now eye to eye with the prospect because the agreements are made. Right. And you can speak to this person as an adult, rather than as someone who is subservient or somehow less than that prospect. It's professional. Like I said, all good meetings start with an agenda. Right. It lets the prospect know that you have a plan. This is one of the things I've heard several times in my own selling, when I'll go back and I'll check with my new customer why they thought it was a good idea to work with me. They'll refer to this verbal agenda and the setting expectations, and they say, you had a plan when you walked in. You didn't waste my time. And there again, the prospect is free to disagree at any point, and it's not going to throw a monkey wrench into your sales call. Right. So any of the stuff that we're going to talk about, they're free to say no to. Questions or comments? Any questions, any questions or concerns about where we are in time? I want to reiterate, this isn't a cold call on the telephone. This is the actual beginning of the conversation with someone who's agreed to speak with us. I've had people that I've worked with for a couple of years before, and they refer to this and they say, well, I can't do that when somebody first picks up the phone. I've never talked to him before. And I went, oh my gosh, how did we miss that? This is further into the beginning of the process. Okay, so what's contained? What needs to be covered in this thing? Where we come up with these is they are representative. The elements of a verbal agenda are representative of the things that tend to go wrong most often in the sales process. So further down the line, right? Further down the line, things come up. oh, you can't get a hold of somebody. We talked about that again, right? So what we do is we take those things that can go wrong most often and we put them in here and we make agreements on them so that they can't or won't pop up later. Okay, so what's the first one? We need to get an agreement on the time that we're going to spend together for this meeting. Right? Has anybody had a salesperson come in and call on them before and they just start talking and it's like, oh my gosh, how long is this thing going to take? Right? 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour 10, right? And there's no one keeping an eye on the time. An agreement on the desired outcome of the meeting, primarily for the prospect, but depending on your comfort level for yourself as well. Questions by their nature are abrasive and invasive. So we want to make sure that we're getting permission from that prospect to ask them questions, no matter how easy or difficult they might be. The next thing, we want to address fit. And specifically, we want to address no fit, right? At some point in the sales call, we want to let the prospect know if what we have isn't a fit. Are they okay to say no, thank you? Are they okay to tell us no and end it? And then think about, at this point, you think about your job as a salesperson. It's not to get the person to say yes. It's to get them to the correct decision, whether that's a yes or a no. Show me a salesperson who's not living in fear of no, and I'll show you a killer salesperson every single time. Right, so address what happens if there's not a fit. Then address what happens if there is a fit. And specifically, what's that decision-making process and what does a think it over look like? And then finally, we want to make some agreement on ground rules for future contact. This is the one. Has anybody, I think we've all had an agreement that we've been stuck in email and voicemail before, right? Radio silence. This, to a great extent, helps alleviate that. So these are the 5 things that you want to cover. You may find that in your business, you have a 6th one, right? Something that happens to you all the time and you want to see if you can head it off at the pass before it becomes an issue, right? Put it in here and make sure that you're addressing it early on in the sales call. So let's do an example. I need a volunteer. Who's done this before? Okay, Alex, you're going to be my volunteer. You need to take yourself off mute. So Adam, we're in a sales call. I'm the sales guy. You're the prospect. Is that okay?
Works for me.
Okay, and so we've talked about baseball a little bit, and I'm ready to move into the sales call. And so at some point, what I'm going to say is Alex, before we get started, I'd like to ask you a few questions about how I like to work, and make sure that's okay with you. Is that okay?
That works.
Okay, first of all, how much time do we have?
I've got about 35 minutes.
Okay, I'd probably be done in 30. Is that going to be okay? I'll keep an eye on the time for us.
I'm gonna hold you to that though.
I'll set my alarm to 30 minutes right now. Okay. And secondly, as a result of our time here today, what would you like to make sure gets accomplished?
As far as Dave, you're gonna have to help me out on this one. I think this
A, B, and how about A, B, and C?
A, B, and C is in 3 things that I think need to get done in the 30 minutes.
Yep. Okay.
At this point, Dave, just to pause you, have you presented the solution to the customer or no?
No.
Okay, so 3 things that I want to get done in a call.
Mm-hmm. So I'm asking the prospect, right? What do you want to make sure I don't miss? What ground do you want to make sure gets covered today while I'm here? And then if I'm comfortable enough, I might say, Alex, here's what I'd like to accomplish. By the end of our time today, what I want to find out is if you think this idea is a good one, if it's feasible, and if we should keep talking. Does that sound okay?
Okay.
Right?
Yeah,
And then at the end of that, if what I have brought to you isn't a fit, are you comfortable telling me no, thank you? Good. Now
Absolutely.
look at his body language. Did y'all see him? I want you to pay attention to what he just did. He leaned forward. He nodded his head up and down like it was going to roll off of his shoulders. You'll see that in your sales calls, or you'll hear that in some form in your sales calls. Okay. Now, Alex, on the other hand, if there is a fit, then what do we do?
at that point, you take the next step and probably try to schedule a follow-up and or something that's got a little bit more conviction behind it.
Okay, now in the role play, I'm the sales guy, you're the prospect. If there's a fit after we're done today, Alex, what happens next?
I would probably need to present that to my management,
Okay,
as well as bring in a few people on the financial side to kind of discuss what this is all going to look like, extended costs and things of that
Okay.
nature.
and if at any point we get to the place where you're just gonna think it over, right? Which means put it on hold, kick cow chips for 6 months. Is it okay at that point if we just call it no thanks?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay, and then finally, do you use voicemail, email, texting?
All of the above.
And so when I use that kind of stuff, I'm usually back to you within a couple hours, right? If I'm traveling, it might be more than that, but it's within 24. Can I have that same expectation of you?
Agreed.
And then one final thing that's not written down here, you mentioned other decision makers, right? If you think this is a good idea and you become a fan of what we're talking about, can we get an agreement that I get to talk to those people in the process to make sure that we're considering their priorities?
Fortunately, yeah, they don't let me go rogue, so I'd absolutely have to bring it in.
Good.
So I do anticipate that they would probably want to make contact with you, once.
I don't ever want to put you in the position to have to sell my stuff. Sound fair?
Yeah, I like that.
Okay, and that's it. That's the way I like to work. I'm glad that's all okay with you. Now, you remember I told you I was going to ask you questions. Here's the first one. When you looked at your calendar and you saw I was coming in today, what made you think that was a good idea? Okay, we can call timeout right now. Okay, so that's the complete verbal agenda. How many of you are uncomfortable right now with thinking about yourself saying that? Thanks for being honest. It's tough to do in the way of process. It feels very uncomfortable, right? But think about, like, if you're in any sort of fulfillment, or if you've been in any sort of fulfillment function for the companies you've worked for, you're going through this process with a customer almost every single time, right? Setting expectations and figuring out what outcomes are. It's okay to do it for sales. And you have to believe me when I tell you, your prospect will love this. Right. And in that role play, without any interruptions and going off track, this takes about a minute. Right. And some key things that have happened in here. First of all, you're getting permission to ask all the questions you got. You got a license to kill with that number 3. Right. On number 4, you're starting to talk about the decision process, and you're probably about 5 to 8 minutes into the sales call. Now, most salespeople, they find out the decision-making process when? After they deliver a quote. after they get caught in radio silence, they finally get a hold of the person and say, yeah, we're not going to do anything for 6 months to a year on this. Right. And we're finding about that in 5 to 8 minutes. I think it's a huge advantage. It's different than the way other people sell. Right. And then regarding radio silence, we figured out that they've made an agreement with us that if we send them a note, they're going to get back to us in a couple hours. And if they don't, you have the opportunity to assert yourself and say, hey, something must have changed. I sent this 4 hours ago. I haven't heard back from you yet. Right. If they remember that agreement, which several do, the next word out of their mouth is going to be, oh gosh, I'm sorry. And they'll explain to you why they didn't get back to you. Okay. Now, it's not perfect. It doesn't happen every time, but it happens enough. It works enough times that I can confidently say, use this in the beginning of your sales call, and you'll have a lot less problems than you may have had otherwise. Questions or comments before we get into this?
Yeah, Dave, I have a question actually.
Yes.
The step when you were talking about getting other decision makers or having the the ability to speak to them. What do you do if a prospect balks at that?
I'd ask them why. There must
Okay, and if
be a reason.
Yeah, if they say, oh, this person, the plant manager or the CEO, they're really busy. They don't like to be bothered with these kinds of things. Or if they just kind of get flustered and you get the feeling they're just not telling you the truth or giving you a straight answer. How do you approach that?
I would say that, Owen, if you were the prospect, I'd say, well, at some point, if you think this is a good idea, this is going to become serious. Right. And along with the reasons that you think it's a good idea, other people by their position in the company, they're going to have totally different concerns than you do. And by the time we present a solution, if we're going to go to proposal on this thing, we want to make sure that their firsthand concerns are considered. I'm not talking about, I don't want to talk to them today. Just once we get past this point, is that going to be okay?
In a kind of a similar vein, I've run into people that tell me they're the decision maker, and they're like, definitely not.
Right.
I feel like I actually run into that quite often.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not always identifiable right away,
Mhm.
but maybe not like the idea of like disarming that, but like what would you say might be kind of a way of, for lack of a better word, almost like coercing them into kind of giving that up?
I would probably wait till later when I find out if they're interested, when I'm qualifying them. One of the questions I'm going to ask them is, who else cares about this stuff? Who's going to care? Right? You think this is a great idea. If you could, you would buy today. What's going to stand in the way of that?
Hey, Dave.
Yeah.
A question just to piggyback off of that point.
Mhm.
So would this be a good way to go about it? Let's say what you can kind of tell, and I think this was Owen, or I think Owen asked the question, or Adam, about they're a little bit hesitant to go to that decision maker per se. Would one thing to maybe bring up would be just empathy and just say, yeah, I understand, that's my job is to go and present new ideas to people all day long, and it's not an easy thing to do. Like, would empathy in that situation be well, or is that something you want to avoid to, prevent doubt, I guess?
It depends on the person. It just depends on the conversation, right? This stuff is, the pushback on this is conversational. And I'll tell you, to handle it right now is going to be easier than handling it after you've delivered your proposal, right? So nothing's perfect. You get better and better at it as you go along. When you get religion on this thing when you end up in the spot that you didn't want to end up in, because you missed it. And most times I hear this stuff gets missed just because salespeople got excited and forgot. Right? But what we're trying to do is we're trying to take all that stuff that you naturally do well and get it under control and put it in the right order. And, you know, in order to do all that good stuff that you know how to do, which is the reason that you got selected to be a salesperson, you got to get a cap on all that stuff, right? And make sure all of that skill, all that talent doesn't come out too soon, or else you're going to be that salesperson that talks all the time, right? And as soon as you start talking, they stop listening. So first of all, before we go on, Owen, did you get your question answered?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And where this comes up is you're going to try this in a sales call. It's not going to work. And what I want you to do when it doesn't work is I want you to get a hold of me, right? So we can go through that, because we want to find out where it broke down and get you more comfortable trying it again. Because my fear is that you try this, you know, for some reason we did it wrong and somebody gets mad at us and we get all butthurt and don't ever try it again. We go, oh, that didn't work, right? We wouldn't consider the fact that we were ineffective, right? So get on the phone and say, damn it, Dave, that stuff that you said got me thrown out of the office. Okay? That's not going to happen, but it might feel like it, right? So I want you to hold me accountable to this stuff, but only when you try it.
In my experience, kind of running this program, because I use it pretty much every time. I just make like a checklist so I can check it while I'm talking on my notes. The one area that I would say I think I wrestle with the most is the last 2 points. And it's not necessarily like my ability to deliver them, or at least I don't think it's my ability to deliver them, because I do, but it's kind of like, it's almost, sometimes there's like an insincere sort of, yeah, we'll tell you if it's not a fit, or, you know, you tell me or this or that. And then, you know, the way that they do that is by not following through like later on.
Right. But at least you've talked about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
You can go back and you can say, hey, you know, something must have changed.
Yeah.
Right. And because you told me that if it wasn't a fit, you'd let me know. So since I haven't heard that yet, now what do we do? Right. And they're going to say, yeah, I forgot, you know, or so to your point, I don't, is there a question there?
Well, I mean, I guess maybe the question is like, I feel like a lot of the times, like the not fit is just kind of like the reaction is like to just not respond to, like, say, like emails or calls, like we were talking about before, like the customer that or prospect. And like, it's like, is there like a way to kind of present that, you know,
I think it would,
to address that in a way that like kind of gives people like the comfortability to say no. Like, and I think that's like, I think most people are just afraid of dishing out what, you know, would be perceived as like bad news to a salesman.
well, I think the stuff that comes out disingenuously is that when you tell somebody it's okay to say no, who really has to be okay with no? Yeah, you do. Right, the person, whoever's saying that, has to be okay. And so the disingenuousness of that is when you tell somebody it's okay to say no, but no isn't okay for you too. Right? So that might be what you're talking about. I think I'm hearing you talk about is this thing gets off track, so you forget 5 and 6 or 4 and 5. Right. And what I see happen most often is we talk about the desired outcome and the person starts listing the things that they want to talk about, but they don't list them as bullet points. They start talking about them. And then we get into a conversation before we've done this other stuff. And that's where it goes wrong. That's what I see happen most often. The second thing is salespeople just forget at some point, they get excited. And the third one is they're not able to do it because they're afraid. Right. And all those three can be overcome by just practice and checking your emotions and trying it, and know that you're going to stumble over it. Prospects don't care that you're stumbling. They care more that they see that you have a plan. Right? And you can write these on a piece of paper and you can look down at them. You can pause, read the question. You can look up at them and ask the question. They're okay with that. You can hand them the questions and let them read them. They're okay with that. Right? The one thing to remember is if you're calling at a high level in an organization too, I think there's some of us that call on CEOs and owners, right? Oftentimes, guess what? They have salespeople too. And you don't have to be great. You just got to be better than anybody they got. So that's the things that you need to remember in those situations is you know more about your business than they do. You're the expert of the two on the topic that you're going to discuss. All right, let's go into the interest of time here. Let's go into the example that that Alex and I ran through, and I'll show you some stuff about the way that I would typically say stuff. Right. First of all, how do you get out of that transition of rapport and bonding into the verbal agenda? And you heard me say before we begin, I want to check with you to make sure the way I like to work is okay and get an agreement on that. Buffy, I'm thinking about you here. People call you and they run on and on and on and on about what they got. Right. At some point, you've got to be able to take control of that inbound call and ask the questions that you want to ask to make that a more efficient, more effective call. Because oftentimes they don't know what they want. They just have this problem. They think they know what they need, but if you can hear them out, you might be sending them in an entirely different direction. So before we get started, so here's what it sounds like for you, Buffy. Somebody comes in and says, and you say, great, thanks for calling. Hey, before we get started, I got a few points I'd like to cover about the way I like to work. Is that okay? And it can be that fast. And then you move into step one, time. How much time have you set aside? Don't overthink this one. Right? If you've scheduled time with them and it's a half hour, it looks like we've got 30 minutes here. Is that still the case? Right? You don't have to put a big preamble in front of this and use a ton of words that don't make any sense. All you're asking them is how much time do they have? And you're the timekeeper. So what you're doing here is as we go through this, you're going to write down the questions that you would use in your voice. And if you'd like to send that to me, it's adult learning, so I can't require it, but send it to me. I'll take a look at it. Step two, outcome. Again, don't overthink this. What would you like to make sure gets accomplished in this time? And then I want you to listen for red flags. I want you to list those things, right? Because typically those are indicators of what the problem is, right? They're going to start giving you symptomatic stuff. Well, I've been having a hard time with late delivery. Thought I'd bring you in to see if you could do something about that, right? I got a company here that they come in low on price every time, but by the time we get finished, I noticed it's 30% more expensive than whoever the highest bidder was. You'll hear stuff like that. That's symptomatic, right? So you just want to jot those down. And right here is what's critical is making sure that you don't get off track. Try to avoid the conversation about that stuff right here. Okay, step three, permission to ask questions, right? Now they gave you a bunch of stuff in number two. In order to get to that stuff, I'd like to make sure you're okay with me asking a lot of questions about you, your business, trying to understand what all this stuff means. Get agreement. This helps me a lot. Because oftentimes I get people that reverse direction. So think of me calling on a CEO who is complaining about their good for nothing salespeople. Right. Well, eventually we start to get serious, and that CEO realizes that they love their people, and they start to backpedal. Right. And it's at that point I got to raise my hand and say, hey, remember about those questions? Here's a tough one. Right. And then I've got to stop that stuff. You'll find yourself in those situations too, and you'll be glad that you covered this ground. Number 4 sounds like this. At the end of our time together, if there's not a fit in anything I offer, are you comfortable telling me no thanks? Now, in here, as you write this thing out for yourself, no or no thank you or no thanks is required in that statement. And the reason why is, you remember we talked earlier about being uncomfortable with salespeople who are trying to get them to say yes. Well, what happens if you tell somebody it's okay to say no? Your ability to communicate goes up. It brings resistance down. It helps with people being more likely to tell you about what their real problems are. Doesn't matter. I'm going to say no anyway. Tell them what I want. Tell them everything. Right. And they're going to nod just like Alex did. Yeah, I'm comfortable. Right. I wish I have this recorded, but Alex sat, we're in a role play, and Alex sat up in his chair, his chest puffed out, and he started nodding. Yes, it's okay. You'll see that in a sales call. I promise you. And when they say that, that's when you say, now, on the other hand, if there is a fit, what happens then? And you'll get a little bit conversational about what their decision process is. If you get the chance, address the think it over part. Because a think it over is a terrible place to be in a sales process. And then finally, address future contact, right? Assuming there's a fit after today's meeting. Assuming voicemail, email as a way of contact, can we agree to return each other's messages in a timely manner? And if there are other people in the process, can we agree that you include me in the dealings with other people? Right. One way to ask, right? I think I've probably, since I wrote this class, I think I've changed because I've been more effective with setting the expectation first. Do you use email, voicemail, texting? Alex said he uses all of those. Okay. And then what I'll do is I'll set the expectation for what they can expect from me. And hopefully that expectation has been met with all you guys if you get a hold of me. And can I expect the same from you? It's a little more efficient. Now there's going to be other people that care about this stuff. If there are, and we need to present to them, can we agree that I present to them? And Alex, I don't know, you know, at this point, I don't think you're going to get the same kind of pushback that you get later on. And that's why we want to cover this, because when it comes up and you realize that that's not a decision maker, like Adam said, you want to refer back to having covered this ground and gotten agreement. If you don't have it, it's going to be more of a struggle, if it's even possible. Does anybody right now have clients that they call on? Customers that buy from you? They're not the right person. And the problem with that is that your relationship with that, your business is hanging on your relationship with that single person in that organization. And if I could give you a warning about the future, if they move, the business is moving too. Right? Terry, you've seen that one a few times, haven't you? In your career. All right, and then finally, how do you get out of this? Right, we have to transition to the sales call after we're done. It's like, okay, those are all the things about how I like to work. And you might throw in here, you remember when I said I was going to ask questions? Here's my first one. Can you help me with why you felt it was a good idea to talk to me? That's the question. Why am I here? If you remember that diagram we talked about last week. This is where strong salespeople don't miss this part. What are we doing here? Okay. So here's the exercise. I want you to write this out. I want you to script this. I want you to use it. I want you to scratch it out and rewrite it. I want this thing to be unrecognizable 6 months from now, from whatever you wrote today. Right? Provided it uses at least these 5 points. And I'll let you know I have a 6th one, right? Because of something else that happens to me all the time. You may or may not have that, but start with this. Again, it is the single thing that my customers tell me causes the most positive change early in the process. You're going to see a difference in how your calls go in a positive way. Maybe a negative way when you first try it, but doubtful. At this time, are there any questions? Adam.
When discussing like the fit or no fit section,
Yes.
and this might just be a matter of taste, but like, do you think it'd be like kind of inappropriate for me to say, you know, if you're comfortable telling me whether this is a good fit, are you comfortable with me telling you if this is a good fit for me? You know, because obviously there's people that offer products similar to what I do, but I might not be the right person. Like sometimes I'll meet with someone, I don't know what they need, then I find out it's just very kind of small or not. Like, I guess, like, you know, they might be determining if I'm a good fit, but I'm also trying to determine if they're a good fit. Do I kind of reveal that, or should I just kind of keep that to myself?
What do you think? When you ask the question, what do you think the answer is?
I'm kind of mixed on it because I feel like it could build like sort of a little bit of rapport in saying that it shows a willingness to say no, like, or willingness to accept no as an answer on my part. But at the same time, like, I don't know if that's like the best way to do it.
Okay.
And that's kind of why I figured I'd ask, because it feels like a natural thing for me to want to say, because it seems like it could be disarming in a way. But yeah, I don't know if it comes across like weak or.
I could give you an analogy. You know,
Okay.
you meet somebody for the first time and you say, you know, let's just get together and see what kind of fit there is. You know, if you like me or not. You know, there might be a chance that you don't like me. If you feel that, are you comfortable telling me so? You know, and the other thing is, I might not like you either. Right. And, you know, I don't know, we might get to the end of sitting down and talking, and I might, just so you know, I might have to tell you that I think you're a knucklehead too. Is that going to be okay? So that's what they're hearing, right? I don't think it behooves us to give them, because it's about them. You know, they're without you sitting there, they're a perfect fit. Right? Until you introduce the fact that they don't fit you. I think there's better ways to do it than right here. Right? Because what we're trying to do is we're trying to get agreement from them on what to expect. I just don't, my personal opinion is it just doesn't sound like, it sounds aggressive rather than assertive. That makes sense? And also, at the risk of using more words, it's a lot of words to use that are unnecessary. It just takes the focus off, it's like, I don't know, it's like you're driving down the main highway and all of a sudden you decide to like veer off and go down the state route for 10 miles, and then maybe I'll hook back on the freeway in about an hour or so. That's what it feels like.
Different analogy. And I'm not trying to make a case for the argument, but it's kind of
Too
the way I
many,
kind of think about it is like there's like kind of a teamwork sort of thing that happens. And I feel like, like say like you're managing a basketball team and you just drafted Magic Johnson. What's going to happen? Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is going to say, yeah, it'd be great. I'm sure you can help us win, but like, do you have what it takes? Like, are you a good fit with us? Sort of thing. Kind of throwback to like Lakers times, I guess. But I guess that's kind of like another way that I think about it. And maybe that's aggressive. But
it is, and in a team setting like the one you're describing, it's a huge power play. Right? In your scenario, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is saying, look at rookie, you prove yourself to us. Now, think about that tonality in a sales setting where you're the salesperson and you're telling somebody, shit, I might not even think you're a fit for me. That's what I hear. Now, as verbally adept as you are at that, I don't know any way that you can come across as other than aggressive or other than big timing somebody. So, try it and see if it works. I think I understand what you're trying to accomplish. You're trying to accomplish that you're honest too. You're not like those other guys who's going to bring you into a lot of times, it's sort of like, have you ever talked to somebody and they have a habit of saying, trust me, or they have a habit of saying, to be honest with you? And every time I hear that from somebody, what I want to say is, how the hell else would you be? And why do you need to say that? Because that tells me that there's a lot of times that you weren't honest. That's what I hear. That could be just me, but if you don't need it, don't stick it in there. Sort of like when you're writing, you'll reread something that you wrote and you'll go, God, I don't need that. I don't need that. I don't need that. This is the same. I wish you guys could have met my partner that I used to work with. He was just so effective at using so very few words. I'm not that good at it, but I can hear that one. If it works for you, just keep doing it, but not if you're trying to make changes, not if you're trying to become even more effective. I think that would be, thanks for letting me pick on you in a group. I'm not sure that's great coaching. It's good training, but not great coaching.
no, I was generally curious, like it's like not something that I've really used at all, but I've thought about it because I feel, and you're familiar with our industry, like I feel like there are so many people that are like, yes, I can do everything, who like very much overpromise. And I feel like that's a natural instinct as a salesperson. It's like, oh yeah, I can do that. Yeah, we can do it that quickly, or whatever. And I feel like that's a way that I want to kind of differentiate myself, as in some ways to come across as someone who's going to be honest with you. And
right.
I think just trying to find new ways to do that, I guess.
Actions speak louder than words, I think. Any other questions? Takeaways. Quickly, let's I'll call on you and tell me one thing that you've heard here today that's going to help you in your business going forward right off the bat? Let's start with Alex.
I don't always remember to do this, but getting permission to ask questions, I usually, that'll kind of come out naturally, like, hey, can I ask you a few questions?
Yeah.
I need to make sure and check that off every time I'm on the phone.
Good.
Because
Thank-
that, if they say yes to that, it's pretty much endless where that conversation can go. So
Okay, thanks. Terry.
I think more than anything, it's finding out the decision makers earlier in the process. I would be guilty of finding out too late.
Okay, good. I hope that helps because, we're 5 minutes in on this, it's very quick. Reese?
I think valuing my time better, knowing that sometimes you get optimistic, or you've had so many smiling dials that when somebody finally talks to you, you just think that you can sell them if you just talk to them longer. But setting expectations right away, so if it's a fit or not a fit, I think was a good takeaway for me.
Okay, so this would be a good time to reiterate that this doesn't happen on a cold call. Right? This is in a meeting that they've agreed to have with us, where we're sitting down to actually talk business together. So that's the one thing I think is confusing this with what happens on a first contact with somebody, I think would be a mistake because they're not ready for this. Right. Buffy, takeaways.
Just what Alex had said at the beginning, that one there sticks out the most is getting permission to ask questions.
Yeah, it's a big deal for you and your environment too. Owen?
Yeah, set an agenda that they agree to and then follow through with it.
Yeah, and remember, there's, in your business, especially, there may be a fifth or a third, a sixth one, Adam?
Not a lot of new takeaways. Aside from maybe some of the nuances of delivering the points, the one thing that I would definitely say is, like, of the tools that I've kind of learned from working with you, this is definitely like the one that I lean on like the hardest. Even if it's not necessarily a new customer, just a lot of these checkpoints have always been really helpful and improved the nature of meetings for me. So
Good. Okay, thank you. Keep using it, Adam, and keep pushing back. I like that. It's very helpful for the people in the group. Now I'm gonna go and cry about it, but it's the important thing. Thanks for coming, everybody. We'll see you next week, and we start talking about how do we get past that symptomatic stuff and really find out what motivates people to buy. If you got any stuff in the meantime, feel free to get in touch with me. If you get this homework assignment done, go ahead and send it to me. I'd be happy to look at it. See you next week, everybody.
Thanks, Dave.
Bye.
thank you, Dave. Thanks a ton as always.